This video is brought to you in association with the family book of Word of the Day, For a Year, Every Year, Forever, a book by Johnny Pearce, myself, and a book designed to expand your vocabulary so that you sound awesome with lots of very big words. An interesting book with some irreverent commentary or etymological, the word history of the words, or interesting facts about the words. Anyway, it's a cracking book. Please go to a reputable bookseller and order yourself a copy.
Hi there, and welcome again to Pearced Off, the counter-apologetics segment of Skepticule Podcast with Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem of evil, and a particular question that I asked in one of my books, the Little Book of Unholy Questions, which talks about photosynthesis. And the question is, why don't all animals photosynthesize? And I ask this in the context of God being omniscient and omnipotent and omnibenevolent, such that, let me restate the problem of evil. If an all-powerful and perfectly good God exists, then evil does not. There is evil in the world, therefore an all-powerful and perfectly good God does not exist. That was one of the original versions of the argument. Slightly better version might be, there exist instances of intense suffering which an omnipotent, omniscient being could have prevented without thereby losing some greater good or permitting some evil equally bad or worse. An omniscient, wholly good being would prevent the occurrence of any intense suffering it could, unless it could not do so without thereby losing some greater good or permitting some evil equally bad or worse. Therefore, there does not exist an omnipotent, omniscient, wholly good being. So, in the light of the problem of evil argument, why is it that millions, billions of organisms over the history of Earth, why is it that all these organisms have needed to kill other organisms, being carnivorous, in order to merely survive? That means that there has been death, suffering and death on a level that is just quite incredible, just so that organisms can exist. And if you were an all-loving deity that could design and create this world, would you design in a necessity, or not even a necessity, would you design in an existence of carnivorousness? It's slightly better because it talks about evil as being gratuitous or not. The evil in the world can still logically exist as long as it's not gratuitous, i.e. that the evil serves a purpose, the suffering serves a purpose. So with regards to the question about photosynthesis, the idea is that eating meat and causing animal pain and death must be necessary for some other greater good. So the Christian is in the position, or any theist is in a position of being able to say, as they always do, that this is logically possible. This, however, is not really good enough, well, for me in any case. It falls into the fallacy of what Richard Carrier calls possibiliter ergo probabiliter. In other words, something is possible, and so therefore it becomes probable. This is not, for me at any rate, again, an epistemologically good method. If I went through my life believing things because they were possible and not probable, I would get into some serious trouble. The Christian would no doubt claim that the rest of the evidence for God means that the evidence for it not being gratuitous, so for the suffering of all these animals over the history of the universe, the death of all these animals because of the existence of carnivorousness, for it not being gratuitous, there must be a greater good, and that greater good is probable. This is not good enough for me, and if this is the case, then God could surely communicate that there is a greater good, not least what the greater good is. So we have a situation where the Christian has to retreat to this position of, well, it's possible there's a greater good, but there being no real evidence that there's a greater good other than the assertion that God is a perfectly good entity. But of course, when we look at this empirical evidence of all this suffering in the world, it seems that God isn't an omnibenevolent entity. So many Christians will also argue that we cannot know the mind of God and that we might not understand what the greater good might be. And I think this is vastly underrating human understanding. It's effectively laughable. I mean, we can understand quantum mechanics, we can understand the machinations of the universe to a great degree, and yet for some reason we're not able to understand why there would be such intense suffering throughout the universe, throughout the history of the universe. Apparently we're just not clever enough to understand the mind of God. So in sum, the fact that a vast number of animals eat other animals in order to merely sort of survive and exist, meaning that there's an incredible amount of pain and suffering on Earth just so that animals can merely survive, as I said, raises some really difficult questions for the theist, and ones which are only ever answered with a sort of get-out-of-jail-free card, implying the omniscience escape clause. We just don't know the mind of God, or God is this omniscient being that knows all these great things that we just can't know. And I actually asked this question to William Lane Craig at the Stephen Law debates some time ago, and the great thing was that that William Lane Craig just stood there. This was after the debate, sort of in person, and he said, "That's a really great question," and he had no answer to it. So obviously it is a bit of a difficult question, but it is effectively the problem of evil, but it's a really powerful problem of evil question because it's talking about natural evil and it's talking about the design of the universe. And in fact, you can take the question one step further. So the initial question is, why don't all animals photosynthesize? That means, why don't all animals rely on a sun for energy so that we don't need to kill and cause the suffering of all these other animals? If you're perfectly powerful and loving God, you would surely make that happen. Plants can photosynthesize, so why can't humans do it? You just need to create a system whereby photosynthesis creates more energy than it already does, which for God surely would be fairly simple. But the next question along the line would be, why do organisms, why do any animal, living creature or living plant matter, why do we need energy at all? This need for energy means that we are consuming resources, and the finite universe becomes problematic. So, you know, there's some really interesting deep questions and discussions to be had there, but really simply, why did God design carnivorousness into the universe, considering he's an all-loving entity? So hopefully lots to talk about for the crew back in the studio, but thanks for that. Please drop by my blog at www.skepticinc.com/tippling. I'm Jonathan M.S. Pearce, and remember, question everything.